I have known Rowan Ashford since we were 12 years old, and I can say without hesitation that the man had no idea what was happening to him until it was far too late to do anything sensible about it. This is, I think, the most important detail of the whole affair. Rowan is not a stupid man. He is one of the sharpest minds I have ever encountered. The Duke of Caldervane, feared in 3 counties, respected in Parliament, the sort of man who could dissect a contract in 12 minutes and find the clause that would ruin the other party in 30 seconds more. He simply could not see it coming because the woman his grandmother smuggled into Caldervane Park was not the sort of woman he had ever thought to defend himself against. I was there for all of it. I tell it as I saw it, and I will not flatter either of them more than the truth requires. It began the August that Rowan's grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Miriam of Caldervane, reached the age of 74 and decided she had waited long enough. She had been waiting, by her own accounting, since Rowan was 26, since the debacle of Cecilia Frome, which was the name none of us mentioned in his hearing, and which had left him with the opinion that a woman's warmth was a performance, her sweetness a currency, and her interest in any man of fortune a thoroughly transactional affair. He was not wrong about Cecilia Frome. He was, however, wrong to apply the lesson to every woman alive, but I had given up explaining this to him sometime around his 31st birthday. He was 34 when his grandmother acted. The Dowager had already worked through a considerable inventory of heiresses. There was Miss Aldgate of the Northumberland Aldgates, who had laughed too brightly and too often at everything Rowan said, even the parts that were not intended to be amusing. There was Lady Fenwick, whose beauty was magnificent and whose conversation was a wall of pleasantries behind which nothing appeared to live. There was the younger Miss Pelham, who had made the error of rearranging his library to look more decorative, which sent Rowan into a silence so absolute and so cold that she wept in the carriage all the way back to London. After the library incident, the Dowager stopped inviting heiresses. "I am taking a different approach," she told me, the week before I arrived at Caldervane for the autumn. We had tea in the yellow sitting room that had been hers since her husband's death, and she poured my cup with the satisfaction of a woman who has made a decision she knows is correct and is giving herself a moment to enjoy it. "I have engaged a companion." "You have companions already," I said. "I have companions who bore me." She set the pot down and smiled, which on the Dowager's face is a particular and slightly alarming thing. "I have engaged a young woman of genuine quality, which is to say, quality of character rather than quality of fortune, which is the only kind worth the name. She is the niece of a country vicar. Her father's family were gentlefolk once. That is finished now. She is entirely without prospects, and she knows it, and she does not allow it to make her either desperate or bitter, which is the rarest thing I have encountered in 40 years of society. She reads well, she listens better, she speaks when she has something to say, and I am told she can keep a hand at cards without either losing badly on purpose or cheating politely to let one win. She sounds," I said carefully, "like a young woman you intend to introduce to Rowan." "She sounds," the Dowager said, in exactly the tone that means the subject is closed, "like a companion. Hand me those biscuits." Elspeth Vane arrived on a Tuesday in a carriage hired at her own expense, which did not prevent her from paying the driver his full rate, and thanking him for a smooth journey on a road that had, by all accounts, been deeply unpleasant. I know this because Croft, the Dowager's personal footman, told me about it with the air of a man who has witnessed something worth remembering. She arrived with one trunk, a leather satchel of books, and a bonnet that had been good once and had made peace with no longer being so. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with a composed and lively face, the sort of face that does not announce itself as pretty but rewards attention. She had dark eyes and an expressive mouth and the kind of posture that comes from genuine self-possession rather than drilling. She was not fashionable. She was not performing. Rowan was in the hall when she arrived, entirely by accident. He had come down to find Mathers, the house steward, about a matter of the north wing guttering, and he encountered instead his grandmother's new companion removing her bonnet and handing it to a maid with a quiet word of thanks. He told me later that he had barely noticed her. I believe him, which is the funniest part of the whole story. She curtsied. He inclined his head in the way he inclines his head at people who are staff adjacent, which is a species of acknowledgement without attention. Then he found Mathers, and the guttering was discussed, and Elspeth Vane unpacked her trunk, and the afternoon proceeded as afternoons do. For 3 days, nothing happened at all. Then Rowan came to the yellow sitting room for his evening visit to his grandmother, a habit of 34 years that not even Cecilia Frome had broken, and found the dowager asleep in her chair, her evening correspondence scattered across the side table, and Elspeth Vane sitting on the low stool near the window with a volume of agricultural essays open across her knee, reading in the last of the light without making any sound at all. She glanced up when he came in. She looked at his grandmother. She pressed her finger to her lips, not with any nervousness, not with the flutter of a woman suddenly alone with the Duke of Caldervane, but with the simple, brisk practicality of someone managing a situation. Then she returned to her page. Rowan stood in the doorway of his grandmother's sitting room for what he told me was an entirely unnecessary amount of time, trying to identify what had just happened to him, and could not. He sat down. He did not know why. He picked up one of the agricultural journals that lived on the table near his usual chair and read it in the dying light while his grandmother slept and her companion read and the fire settled and the clock ticked and nothing at all was said until the dowager stirred and blinked and said, "Rowan, there you are." "Elspeth, ring for tea." "Already done," Elspeth Vane said, setting aside her book, "when I heard your breathing change." The dowager gave her a look of pure approval. Rowan watched this exchange and felt, for reasons he did not examine, that he had walked into a room where an arrangement was already in place that he did not fully understand. He was correct, he simply did not know it yet. The thing about Elspeth Vane, as I came to understand over the following weeks, was that she was constitutionally incapable of performing. This was, in a household that had received a revolving series of perfectly managed young women, a quality so unusual as to be almost incomprehensible. She did not try to charm Rowan. She did not try to impress him. She did not arrange herself near him at dinner or engineer encounters in the gallery. When she was with the dowager, she was focused, warm, and present. When she was not with the dowager, she was in the library, which Rowan noted with some caution, having had the library rearranged on him, or in the walled garden, walking the gravel paths with the methodical pleasure of someone who thinks more clearly outdoors. She never touched a single book on his shelves. She brought her own. This, for reasons I understand completely, interested Rowan very much. He began to find reasons to be in the library. This is the sort of thing a man of 34 with a granite reputation tells himself is not what it is. He had correspondence to draft. He had the estate accounts. He had, on one memorable occasion, a sudden and pressing interest in the history of the northern wool trade, which is not a text any living man has opened voluntarily unless compelled by extraordinary motivation. Elspeth was always in the same chair near the east window, and she always had a different book, and she never looked up from it except to acknowledge him with a brief, pleasant nod, and she never attempted to begin a conversation, and she never angled to catch his eye. It was the most unsettling experience of his adult life. He tried once to provoke her into ordinary performance. He was rude, in the way he is rude when he is testing, not cruelly, but with the particular chill of a man who is accustomed to people flinching. He said something dismissive about the volume she was reading, which was a collection of sermons from the previous century. He said he imagined it was rather dull for a woman of her age. She looked up. She considered him with the expression of a person who is genuinely interested in something puzzling rather than offended by it. "Not particularly," she said. "The third one argues that a man who acts charitably only when observed has understood neither the sermon nor the point. I find that applicable rather widely." She paused. "Do you read sermons, Your Grace?" "I do not," he said. "That may be why you find the subject dull." She returned to her page. Rowan told me about this encounter on the evening of the same day. I was staying at Caldervane for the month, as I often do in autumn, and he came to my rooms with a glass of brandy and the expression of a man who has been hit by a door he did not see. "She is impertinent," he said. "She sounds like she answered you honestly," I said. "That is what I mean," he said, and finished his brandy and left without further explanation. The dinner party was his grandmother's doing, which I should have seen immediately and did not identify until it was thoroughly underway. The dowager announced it one morning at breakfast with the serene confidence of a woman who does not invite disagreement. A small dinner, 20 covers, neighbors and acquaintances, nothing elaborate. Rowan agreed because he always agrees to his grandmother's dinners. "They are non-negotiable." What he did not expect was the seating arrangement. I will say for the dowager that she is a woman of extraordinary precision in the matter of table placement. She had seated Elspeth Vane at the midpoint of the table, not at the foot where a companion would conventionally sit, and she had put Rowan directly across from her. She had put on his left Lady Dunmore, whose conversation reliably produces a desperate wish for silence, and on his right Sir Harwick, who is kind but comprehensively deaf. The effect was that any exchange Rowan made at the table was either impossible or excruciating, and the one point of ease was the woman directly across from him, with whom conversation required nothing but looking up. He looked up. They talked. I watched it from 3 seats down with the composed attention of a man taking careful mental notes. It was not the conversation I had seen Rowan have at 100 dinners, the measured, performed thing, gracious enough to be socially functional and cold enough to discourage anyone who came too close. It was something else. She asked him about the northern estate he was managing for a cousin. He answered seriously, with genuine engagement. She asked a follow-up question that revealed she knew what a land steward's fee schedule actually looked like. He looked at her with the slight adjustment of expression that on Rowan's face constitutes significant surprise. "Your father's family farmed?" he asked. "Managed 3 farms before the entail ran out," she said. "I kept the accounts from the age of 14. "You kept the accounts?" "My uncle could not add. My father was unwell. Someone had to." She said it without any appeal to sympathy. It was simply what had happened. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he asked her about the farms. They talked through 3 removes. The dowager at the head of the table ate her soup with the specific pleasure of a general watching a battle go according to plan. After the guests had gone and Elspeth had helped the dowager upstairs and said good night, Rowan and I sat with the port decanter in the dining room, and he told me it had been a tolerable evening. "Only tolerable," I said. He refilled his glass. "She knows more about estate management than half the men in this county." "She does," I said. And nothing," he said, in the tone that means there is a great deal else, and none of it is going to be admitted tonight. I let it rest. I knew the dowager. I knew this was not finished. The morning that changed things arrived with a frost. The garden was silver and still, and I came down early for the particular pleasure of a cold autumn morning, and found Elspeth Vane already in the walled garden in a wool coat 2 seasons old, her breath coming in quiet clouds, examining something among the frost-killed rose canes with the focused attention she gave to everything she looked at. I was about to make my presence known when I heard Rowan behind me. He had come out through the east door, which is the one that leads from his study, which means he had been in his study at this hour, which was not particularly unusual. What was unusual was that he stopped when he saw her, and he stood at the door for a moment before walking out into the garden, not with any declaration, just walking toward the same garden she was already in. "I stayed where I was. I am not proud of this." He said something I could not hear from my position. She turned and answered. He looked at what she was looking at. He said something else. She laughed, not the bright, performed laugh of the drawing room, but a quick, private thing, surprised out of her, and put her hand over her mouth afterward as though she had not intended to let it out. He watched her do it, and something happened to his face that I have not seen in 8 years. He looked like himself, the self he was before Cecilia Frome. I went back inside and told no one, but I found the dowager at breakfast, and I looked at her with specific attention. She was buttering her toast with entire innocence. "You arranged that dinner deliberately," I said. "I arrange all my dinners deliberately," she said. "That is what good hostessing is." "The seating." "Good seating is one of the great invisible arts." She took a bite of toast. "Is there something you wish to say, Oliver?" "You put them at the breakfast table this morning as well," I said. I had worked it out between the garden and the dining room. "You told her yesterday that you would not need her until 10. You are always at breakfast at 8:30. He is always in his study at dawn, the east garden door." The dowager looked at me with the serene warmth of a woman who has been correctly understood. "She makes him comfortable," she said simply. "Not because she is trying to. She doesn't try to do anything for him. She simply exists and he notices. He has not noticed a woman in 8 years, Oliver. He has endured them." She set down her toast. "She reads his accounts in his library because she likes the chair by the east window, and she does not rearrange anything. and she asks him questions because she genuinely wishes to know the answers, and she laughs when something is actually amusing rather than when she thinks it is expected of her. He has no idea what to do with any of that. He will shortly do something about it, or I will assist him. You could simply tell him, I said. I could, she agreed, and he would spend 6 months constructing arguments against his own feelings. This is faster. She poured her tea. More toast. It was another 10 days before the thing broke open. In retrospect, the Dowager's timing was perfect to the hour, which I respect enormously even as a man who was caught entirely flat-footed by it. Rowan had spent those 10 days in a state I can only describe as barely contained. He was in the library every morning. He found reasons to be near the yellow sitting room in the evenings. He revised his grandmother's afternoon schedule twice, on the stated grounds of concern for her health, in ways that resulted in Elspeth being at liberty at hours that corresponded exactly with his own. I watched all of this and said nothing, and Elspeth, for her part, continued to exist with the same straightforward warmth and made no calculation I could detect. She liked his grandmother. She was, I think, beginning to like the library. Whether she had worked out what she felt about the library's primary other occupant, I could not say. Then the Dowager summoned me to the yellow sitting room at 4 in the afternoon, gave me a cup of tea, and told me she had sent Rowan a note asking him to come to her at past, and that she had also sent Elspeth a note asking her to come at past, and that when they both arrived, she was going to develop a sudden urgency to speak with the housekeeper. That is extraordinarily direct for your usual method, I said. I am 74, she said. I have decided to economize. They arrived together, having met in the corridor, which she had also arranged by timing the notes to ensure they would. I saw this on their faces when they came in. Elspeth a step behind Rowan, both of them slightly arrested by finding the other already there. Sit down, the Dowager said, both of you. She paused with the artistry of a woman who has been performing this particular art for 7 decades. Mrs. Coyle wanted to speak with me about the linen inventory. I have been putting her off for a fortnight. Oliver, would you stay with them? I shall be back directly. She was not back directly. She was back 45 minutes later, which was, I am certain, precisely what she had intended. In those 45 minutes, I attempted to be decorative and unintrusive. I had a newspaper. I studied it with great concentration. It did not entirely prevent me from observing what happened in the room. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Rowan stood near the window. Elspeth sat in her usual low chair and opened a book, or pretended to. The fire was quite warm, and the room had the quality of held breath. Then he said, without looking at her, "You are not actually reading." She looked up. "No," she agreed. "I was thinking." "About what?" She was quiet for a moment. This was characteristic of her. She did not answer questions before she had formed a true answer. About whether it is better to know a thing clearly or to leave it comfortable and uncertain. He turned from the window then. He looked at her in the direct, unguarded way he had begun to look at her when he thought no one was watching, except that now he was making no effort to conceal it. "Which have you decided?" he asked. "I have not decided," she said. "I find I am waiting to see what the situation requires." Something shifted in his face. He crossed the room, not in the deliberate, considered way he moves through rooms he commands, but with the slight unsteadiness of a man who has made a decision before he finished making it, and sat down in the chair across from her. Not the chair by the window, the chair beside hers. "Elspeth," he said. I had not heard him use her given name before. The sound of it in his voice was such that I found my newspaper was suddenly very important. "Your Grace," she said. "Rowan," he said, "please." She looked at him for a moment in that composed and attentive way, and then something in her composure altered very slightly. Not cracking, only shifting, the way a window shifts when the latch gives, from closed to the barest possibility of open. "I did not come here to be anyone's," she began. "I know," he said. "I know exactly what you came here to be, and I know it had nothing to do with me, and I have been aware for some weeks that whatever is happening in this sitting room and that library has not a single thing to do with what you were engaged for, and I have been attempting to determine whether I am imagining it." "You are not imagining it," she said quietly. There was a silence of the kind that has a great deal in it. "My grandmother," he said, "arranged this." "I suspected," Elspeth said. when the seating at dinner placed you directly across from me and surrounded you with Lady Dunmore on one side and Sir Harwick on the other. He looked at her for a moment, and then something happened that I had not seen in a very long time. He laughed. Not the controlled, social thing, the real one, brief and sudden, coming up from somewhere genuine. "She is completely without shame," he said. "She is very fond of you," Elspeth said, "and I think she is very clever." "She is the most strategic mind in the northern counties," he said, "and she has been deploying it against me since August, and He stopped. He looked at his hands for a moment. When he looked up again, his face had the particular quality of a man saying a thing he has not said before, and is saying it for the first time and means it precisely. "I am grateful to her. That is a thing I did not anticipate saying." The Dowager chose this moment to return. She came in with the specific energy of a woman who has not been anywhere near the linen inventory, and she read the room in approximately 1 second, and she sat down in the chair by the fire and picked up her embroidery with magnificent composure. "Well," she said, not looking up, "the linen is accounted for. Is there tea?" "Grandmother," Rowan said. "You arranged all of this." "I arranged a dinner, a morning schedule, and 1 or 2 small adjustments to the timing of certain notes." She threaded her needle. "Do not exaggerate." "You arranged for us to be in this room alone." "I arranged for Mrs. Coyle to speak with me about the linen, which has been a genuine concern. It is not my fault the linen takes a considerable time to discuss." She looked up. Her eyes went to Rowan, then to Elspeth, and back to Rowan. "I trust," she said in a tone so mild as to be almost gentle, "that the 45 minutes were not wasted." "Grandmother," he said her name in the voice of a man who is not actually angry and knows she knows it. "Rowan," she said his in the voice of a woman who has one. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he rose from his chair and did something I had not seen him do since he was a boy. He crossed to his grandmother, took her hand from the embroidery, and pressed it briefly between both of his. "Thank you," he said, sincerely and with full reservations. "The reservations will pass," she said, patting his hand. "Sit down and have some tea, the pair of you. Elspeth, ring the bell." That is not, of course, where it ended. There was the tea, and the careful, slightly stunned conversation of 2 people who have admitted something significant and are navigating the altered shape of the room. And then there were the days that followed, which I observed with great interest and less newspaper. There was a conversation in the walled garden on a clear October morning that I was not close enough to hear, and would not have intruded upon in any case. There was an evening in the library with the lamps burning low, which I know of only because Croft told me, with great discretion, and only because I asked, that Miss Vane and the Duke had been in the library together until well after the household went to bed, which in Caldervane's library is a room that has 3 doors and excellent drafts, and is entirely above reproach. And I relay this only because it illustrates the manner in which 2 people who are not performing anything can still be entirely absorbed in one another. There was the morning that Rowan came to find me in the breakfast room with the expression of a man who has decided something large and is managing the weight of it. "I intend to speak to Elspeth this morning," he said, "about the possibility of—" He stopped. He started again. "About whether she would be willing." "Yes," I said. He looked at me. "You don't know what I was going to ask." "You were going to ask whether she would consent to your addressing her formally," I said, "with a view to—" "Yes," he said. "Yes," I said, "she will." He looked at me with the expression of a man who finds this either gratifying or suspicious. "You cannot know that." "I have been watching 2 people not perform at each other for a month," I said. "I know it." He went to the garden. I stayed where I was and ate my eggs and felt, for the first time in 8 years of watching Rowan Ashford keep the world at the distance he had decided was safe, something that I can only describe as relief. The breakfast was very good. The morning was bright. Through the dining room window I could see the 2 figures in the walled garden, standing near the frost-scorched rose beds, and though I could not hear anything at all, I could see that Elspeth Vane had her chin lifted in the particular way it lifts when she is answering something honestly, and that Rowan was listening with the stillness of a man who is allowing himself, for the first time in a long time, to be entirely present. The Dowager appeared in the doorway with her own breakfast and looked through the same window and said nothing for a long moment. "Well," I said. "He has asked her," she said. And she is telling him that she did not come here expecting anything and that she wishes to be certain he understands this. You cannot know that from here, I said. You cannot hear them. No, she agreed. But I know my grandson and I know her, and I know that she will say that because she is that sort of person, and he will say something in return that I do not need to hear to know is the truest thing he has said in 8 years. She sat down and poured her tea. Hand me the toast. Elspeth Vane became the Duchess of Caldervane the following spring, in the small church on the estate grounds, with 23 guests, which is exactly the number the Dowager considers intimate. The Dowager sat in the front pew with her embroidery and an expression of bottomless satisfaction. I stood at Rowan's left. The morning was cold and fine, and the light through the old windows laid pale ribbons across the stone floor. And when Elspeth came in on her uncle, the vicar's arm, she wore a gown of pale grey-blue that had been chosen, I think, because she liked the color rather than because anyone had advised it. And she walked down the aisle with the same composure she had brought to everything, unhurried, entirely herself. Rowan watched her come toward him with the expression I had seen first in the walled garden on the frost morning in October, and which I had not stopped being glad to see. When they were pronounced, and when he took her hand, he said her name, just her name, quietly, as though it were a thing he was making certain of. And she looked up at him and said his, and that was that. At the reception, the Dowager received the congratulations of the assembled guests with the modesty of a woman who had had nothing whatsoever to do with it, and said so to anyone who raised the subject. She said this while wearing, I noticed, the small particular smile of a woman who has arranged something magnificent and knows it. I sat with her for a while in the afternoon when the guests were dispersing, and Rowan and Elspeth had gone to walk in the walled garden, which had been their habit since October and would, I suspected, remain their habit for the rest of their lives. You were right, I said. I am frequently right, she said, about anything in particular. That she would not try to do anything for him, that she would simply exist and it would be enough. The Dowager was quiet for a moment, watching the window where the garden lay in the thin spring light. She did not need to try, she said. She has always been exactly herself. He simply needed to see it without being dazzled or deceived or managed. He needed someone who was not performing anything. She set down her teacup with gentle finality. The rest followed naturally. I thought about this for a moment. It did require the dinner seating, I said, and the notes and the linen inventory. A small catalytic assistance, she said. The garden, the library, the mornings, those were entirely their own. Rowan and Elspeth came in through the east garden door while we were still talking, their voices preceding them, her saying something low and pointed, him answering with the dry warmth that had been entirely absent from his voice for 8 years, and was now as natural as breathing. They came into the drawing room with the wind still in their coats and found us at our tea, and Elspeth sat down and picked up a biscuit and said, conversationally, to the Dowager, I have been thinking that the rose beds in the north corner of the garden need to be lifted and replanted entirely. The canes are past saving. I have thought the same for 2 seasons, the Dowager said with great pleasure. Rowan has refused to address it. I have not refused, Rowan said, taking the chair beside Elspeth with the ease of a man who has learned where he belongs. I have deprioritized it. The same thing, Elspeth said, and looked at him with the expression that was not performance and never had been simply warmth, direct and clear. He looked back at her in the same way. The Dowager refilled her cup. I ate my biscuit. Outside, the spring afternoon was deepening toward evening, and the light was going amber and long across the old stone floors, and at Caldervane Park, which had been an anxious and overmanaged house for 8 years, something had settled into its proper quiet at last. I think about it sometimes, the particular grace of a woman who was not trying to do anything except exist, and the particular grace of a man who finally allowed himself to notice. The scheme was the Dowager's, she will never deny it, and she was right not to. But the thing itself was theirs. Nobody arranged the morning in the frost garden. Nobody arranged the evenings in the library. Nobody arranged the way he said her name when the world was watching, or the way she looked up and said his. That was simply what happened when 2 honest people stopped not seeing each other. I was honored to witness it. I have been honored to know them both.